So I have a question to Max on the political feasibility. So it seems to me that the political feasibility would depend quite a lot on how the progress towards different SDGs turns out to be. So do you have any thoughts how to kind of cross-link to the SDG analysis that Kevin presented on?
Yeah, I'm Dale Rothman from the University of Denver, and something that sort of cuts across a number of the talks. I'd like to hear some comment, and this particularly relates to the notion of the soft constraints and linking across the SSPs, is to what extent do you see the IAMC community being able to do more work looking at what I would call sort of societal, not societal, behavioral and institutional policies, which gets a little tricky because it could sort of be pushing us from one SSP to another. And I've only seen a few studies out there that really looked at things like lifestyle changes and behavioral policies, but they seem to can have a fairly big effect. And this includes sort of Brian's work, the paper he worked with on John Bongart's on population.
Please. Miles Zhang, University of Oxford. Question to the whole panel, but particularly prompted by that very interesting figure that Satoshi Takeda showed of the FSB, the TCFD figure about company reports, and the fact that less than 10% of companies are actually reporting a strategy that's consistent with 2 degrees. And it's how can the IAM community inform? It seems that companies thinking about what is feasible is perhaps not perhaps lagging behind countries in this. And I'm really asking how the IAM community could help interact with corporations to help corporations increase their understanding of what's feasible in the transition.
Maybe I respond quickly to Evelina, since it was directly addressed to me. Though this feasibility is popping up everywhere, I guess, given its broad range. For me, sustainable development is high on the desirability scale. If you divide desirability from feasibility, SDGs are on the desirability part. So we are taking those as desirable goals, and those are non-negotiable, or in a way pertain to this hard constraint part. And we're not willing to give up some desirable outcomes in terms of poverty or air pollution in exchange for improved political feasibility because of lobbying being reduced. So I think it's good to try to keep, and that the whole intention of the chart is try to separate, because we had this endless discussion about the two terms, desirability and feasibility, merging together sometimes too closely, and my intention there was to try to keep the two things separate. With that said, for a given set of desirable goals, and dependent on that set, the feasibility will concern, so the soft ones, will vary. So which ones are we going to take into account? Those that the models, in terms of the sustainable development goals, those that the model can deal with so far. Because that's only what we can do so far in assessment of the literature, like the one we are doing in R6. So we've seen that more and more dimensions. I think the chart that you had has, I don't know, 10, 15 indicators of multiple dimensional sustainability being covered, and the review also by Eileen. So I think we take those, all the scenarios that can handle those as fixed desirable goals, and work around about political feasibility around those, as taking those as given.
Perhaps picking up the question by Miles on the different companies, and how can we collaborate with the business community in general. I mean, there are many different IEM studies that are connected to market expectations for certain goods and products, which I think are interesting for businesses. So we at IASA have actually a long tradition to work together with some of the bigger companies to better understand also the needs and the concerns of different companies. in that sense. But I would say also the activity that Elma and Jay are leading in terms of better understanding the transitional risks and the so-called finance risk pathways for different companies is, I think, also something that the IAM community can provide. Although I need to add very quickly a caveat. Most of the scenarios are too aggregated for what some of the finance sector and the companies actually need. So you need some sort of mechanisms to downscale the scenarios to the, to the information that then would better translate those risks for different companies and industries. I think that might be a very interesting community activity to find out how would you do that in a sound way, rather than a lot of assessments that I see in the literature, which basically tries to downscale them in a way that I would have difficulties with sometimes.
Well, the companies or businesses are struggling to integrate the scenario analysis into their assessment of business resilience. And the reason is, first of all, they cannot define the business resilience because it requires a lot of scenarios, because they must prove their resilience in the scenarios where the climate change significantly materialize, also in the scenarios that where the mitigation efforts are very successful, but they requires a very significant business transformation. So incorporating those elements into the one story of business resilience is very costly and the time consuming. So probably the IAMC can do in assisting those efforts by the businesses is that, we need certain, kind of the consortium or the platform to translate many studies existing already or forthcoming studies to link with those business requirements and to assist the formulation of a business relevant scenarios in the future. And I think those efforts can kind of resonate with soft constraints discussion, because it certainly facilitates the businesses to do more for preparation or for the certain pathways of the climate change. So I think it can be linked with that kind of discussion. Thank you.
One more set of questions. Nico, please.
Yeah, Nico Bauer from Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. My question goes to Massimo regarding the feasibility. And I think it requires a little more, or it would help if we would have a more staged process here, and that we also include the possibilities to ask questions like, if we do not do at minimum now this and that in mitigation, then certain mitigation goals will not be achievable anymore, rather than, and this is mostly the framing of this feasibility exercises, what mitigation goals in the long term can we still achieve? Yeah. So can we still achieve 2 degrees? Can we still achieve 1.5 degree? Given these long-term constraints. But it would also be interesting if we do not do near-term mitigation action of certain degrees, then we still cannot achieve minimum goals in the longer term. So that would put a more staged and sequenced approach to the analysis.
Thank you, Nico. Perhaps one more question or comment. Yes.
Yeah, I have two now.
Then we close it.
I got a
Thank
mic. Bas van Ruiven, IASA. I had a question around how these things all link together, because of course they do, right? The SDGs influence the feasibility, and somehow feasibility is an important, or scenarios and SSPs define how the context of feasibility attainment. And when we think about updating our scenarios, actually we're now starting to think that we should leave the concept of a bare no policy baseline and bring in policies and bring in sort of where the world is currently heading. And in that context, we recently actually had a study where we were, rather than using a bare baseline for the financial impact analysis, we were using at a policy baseline and then looking to 2 degrees, and then the financial sector actors came back to us and said, well, actually that gap for the next decade is actually not that big between the current policies and the 2 degree scenario, so we don't see that much of a transition shock. And that brings then to your point, saying if the companies are not believing or investing in line with the current policies of the countries, but are actually sort of following that no policy baseline and not believing that the countries will actually implement their current policies, how do we go about that in our scenario development between baselines and no policy, without policy, and think about policy implementation, right? If the real world or the economy is investing in a different way than what the policies are telling us where it's heading. Any thoughts on that in the context of feasibility would be helpful, interesting.
Unfortunately, just exceptionally, it's okay. So, I can answer to Bas and to the other question. Wow. No, we don't have the time, unfortunately. We can have... I'm sorry. Okay.
I just wanted to point out.
So
that-
weak. Okay.
I just wanted to point out.
Very quickly, please.
Yeah, I know. So the companies are only interested in the next decade. That's what came out there.
Okay.
It's all about strategy. We need mid-century strategies for companies, not just countries.
So,
Yeah, I can. I'm not sure, Bas and Miles, whether I can answer your question, but I think policy volatility is a reality, and companies are more or less operating in this environment where policies come and go relatively quickly. So there's an inertia between a certain policy and how how companies react to that. And I think, at least it's my understanding, if you can take out that policy uncertainty out of the game, the company is actually reacting very, very quickly to it. But they only react if there is no uncertainty in the policy itself. As long as the policy is uncertain, usually you wait until you invest big amounts of money. But I think I'm saying something that everybody here knows as well. So.
And I want to add, just in terms of the framework, and this goes back to I think one of the recommendations related to the policy topic in the SSP RCP framework is that somehow I think for many people out there and users, they don't really realize that the whole framework of SSP RCP combinations is available to use. So if they think, oh, well, I can't use that framework because there's no policy in the SSPs. Well, in the SSP no policy baselines, there's no policy. But in SSP 2.6, which is aimed at the 2 degree scenario, it's the one that you pointed to, there is. And that's a scenario. That's an existing scenario that people could use as a baseline, as a reference point, to then do their analysis relative to that. So somehow I think that's a communication challenge, is to say these are all available. It's just that when you show a matrix of whatever, 30 of these, it's a bit overwhelming to say, hey, take any of them. It's not just 5 SSPs, it's 30 different combinations. Somehow we have to address that issue. One feasibility-related note that is in my mind that I wonder about is, can we apply this way of thinking to the high end of scenarios, right? We have a lot of people out there waiting to jump all over the AR6 because it continues to, it will continue to emphasize RCP 8.5 when there's a bunch of people out there in the world convinced that that is a completely implausible outcome that only is there to scare people about the high end of climate change. And an assessment of, well, is it too high? Is that a feasibility question? Does the feasibility only apply to things that you want to try to do on the low end? Or is it something we can use to evaluate other kinds of scenarios like the high end? Yeah, well, yeah, but I can think of constraints or resource constraints or things like that that might apply. I don't know.
So thank you very much.